Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Sheldon Fell, and I'm with the International Grief Institute, and we're having all kinds of technological problems tonight, but we're having a little bit of fun. Tonight's guest is Sharon Ehlers. Sharon is a certified grief recovery specialist. She is also a Reiki master teacher and an award-winning author. And she's going to tell us tonight about how Reiki can be used to ease grief. So welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you, Linda. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's good to have you here. And I apologize for the technological problems tonight. My goodness. But it's nice to have you here and share with us, your expertise. It's really interesting to me that you are pairing two very powerful fields. Reiki is energy work that's, an ancient practice for healing, and grief is an area that can use a lot of healing. And so before we get into your practice of Reiki, tell us, what's your backstory?
Well, let's be honest about how I got into Reiki. And basically, I was working in Washington, D.C. for a presidential appointee, and I was very stressed out. And so about 10 years ago, I found a business card on a bulletin board in a coffee shop, and it said, relax. And I thought, that's exactly what I need. I need to relax. And so I called. I had no idea what it was. And I had my very first Reiki session, and I felt so much better as a result of, and it gave me an opportunity to sort of have a tool to help me get through my job. So fast forward, and about 8 years ago, my best friend Joy died by suicide. And within 2 years after that, then my former fiance, John, also died by suicide. So I found that I gravitated to Reiki as a way of decompressing from the grief. And it made me feel more relaxed, calmer, not so strung out from my, emotional roller coaster. So over time, I realized that Reiki was something that I could use on myself. And I trained more and more to become a Reiki master. And then I used my Reiki techniques as I was grieving to really kind of get me through my grief.
Wow. And so back when you first had Reiki as a client, so did you keep up with it over the course of that time until you lost your best friend and then your former fiance?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because the office space that I rent right now is from my original Reiki master teacher. And
cool.
Yeah, she was the one that told me that I'd be moving back to California from DC. And I was thinking, really? Okay. She knew before I knew that I was moving back. And then once I moved back, I was so interested and excited to learn more about Reiki that I started taking classes from her. So I was actually going through a lot of those classes, a couple of those classes in the different levels when Joy died. And then I think I became a Reiki master after, I was a Reiki master prior to John passing away. So it was kind of intertwined amongst both of their losses and a stressful job. So I just kept going with it.
Okay. And so you can, if you became a Reiki master, so you can use Reiki on yourself?
Level 1 in Reiki is healing yourself. So that was the very first level that I took. And it happened to coincide with me coming back to California and then also with Joy's death. So being able to heal myself was one of those things that I had learned in the very first level of Reiki. Level 2 is to heal others. And then level 3 is to learn how to teach others to heal themselves.
Okay.
So that's kind of how it works, is the 3 levels. And that's why level 1, which is pretty rudimentary, but absolutely perfect for people who want to, heal themselves. And that's why grievers would find it so helpful because they can use it on themselves. They don't have to be an expert or Reiki master or anything.
Okay. And for those people that don't want to learn to use it on themselves, they can come to people like you who
Absolutely.
can. Okay. Okay. And
Absolutely.
Reiki, I don't know very much about Reiki. And so with Reiki, do you touch the client or not?
It's a personal preference. I
Okay.
think it's up to the client what they prefer, and usually I ask. Reiki is typically a hands-on
Okay.
modality, but some people, either for health issues or other issues, don't want to be touched. And so even though it's a very gentle, light touch, I can still do Reiki by standing over them and using my hands. I can actually do it in various different ways without touching them at all.
Okay. And so you can also send Reiki to someone remotely. Is
Yes,
that
and I
right?
know that people have a difficult time understanding that, but energy has no constraints of time or space. And I'll use
Okay.
an example. When my son, who's in medical school, is studying for a test, he'll send me an email or send me a text and say, Mom, I've got a test tomorrow. Can you send me Reiki so I get some good sleep and I remember everything? And so usually what I do is I take his picture and I send the Reiki to his picture. And there's various different ways that you can send distant Reiki, but that's one of the ways. You can do it over Skype. You can do it. Yes, last night I did a Reiki session with somebody over the phone, and she was in Minneapolis. So it's hard for people to understand how that works, but it does work. I'm a scientist. I'm an engineer. I can't explain it. It works. Energy has no bounds of space and time.
Okay. That's really, really cool. How is it different from prayer? Because
You know,
I think of how, we can pray for someone remotely as well. And that's long accepted in many cultures around the world. And so Reiki doesn't seem like it would be that different.
well, Reiki is a spiritual practice. And for me, I'm Catholic. I tend to bring in the prayer component when I'm doing Reiki. So I also bring in the angels. Not every Reiki master does that, but that's my preference. So as I'm sending Reiki, I'm also sending angels. I'm also sending, I'm also praying for the person that I'm doing Reiki on. That's just what works for me. And I prefer bringing that spiritual component because I believe that's how Reiki was actually, brought together. It was a Buddhist monk who, was trying to find the meaning of life. And so it was really a practice in the early days of, growing spiritually and becoming your best self. So
It was designed to be I often say that she who heals others heals herself. And
absolutely.
so I think about that with Reiki is that, as you send Reiki to clients, whether remotely or on site, that has to be beneficial for you as well.
It is. And I always try to do everything with love and light. So I never have experienced any darkness or anything that isn't love and light. And so for me, because I'm a channel, I'm not sending my energy to the person. I'm channeling the energy from the universe to that person. So as it's coming through me, after a session, I'm just as relaxed and feeling happy and stress-free as the person is on the table. So it's a great way to receive and give both at the same time.
Yeah, and so you're a conduit.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, that's really beautiful. I love that. Do you ever have anyone who says, someone who is a conservative religious background, do you ever have any of them say, oh, I can't do that. That's not, within my belief? Because I go back to the idea that prayer is widely accepted and it's sending, love and, well-being to somebody. And yet Reiki, again, is sending love and light. And so what do you say to people who think it's so,
I hear that a lot. Most people don't realize, that as a Christian, as a Catholic, I don't feel any conflict at all with sending Reiki to an individual. Those people who have an issue with it tend to not come around. Tend to not. I mean, even with the hospital situations, we have over 900 hospitals across North America that practice Reiki, but not many Catholic hospitals. So interesting that there's still sort of a feeling that there's, something that's not right with sending Reiki. But as a Catholic all my life, and because I pray and I bring in the angels and et cetera when I'm doing it, I feel like it's an extension of my faith. So,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think people who are very much against it don't even want to know about it. And so we sort of end the conversation at that point, because there's not much you can say. You have to experience it to really, know how it works.
Right. That's right. Right. So how can Reiki help those who are grieving? How do you use it? Again, you are a certified grief recovery specialist as well as a Reiki master teacher. And so how do you pair that?
Well, I think one of the things about grief that I understand better now that I've been through it a few times is that there are responses that we go through physiologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And when you think about, not being able to sleep, stomach ache, not feeling like you want to eat. Maybe for me, I was having chest pains. I realized that the benefits of grief actually match the responses to grief almost one for one. And so when somebody comes in, they're feeling very much in a way that they want to be healed. They want to feel calm, because you need energy in order to get through your grief journey. And grief is such an energy depleting emotion that if you don't replace it, we get so worn out and then we get sick, and then, all kinds of things happen. We may have panic attacks, we may have heart attack.
Right.
Reiki has the opportunity, because it is a healing modality, to go right to those places where somebody's grieving, especially the heart, and really bring it back into balance, so that it doesn't necessarily take it away, but it does give you the emotional, physical, and spiritual stamina you need to be able to tackle your grief journey, and all the ups and downs that come with it.
Yeah, I think of it when we go through grieving, and you went through it. You're still going through it. Within the past year of losing your dad, and so I think with grief, it's really critical that we take good care of ourselves physically, because what happens with that is that it helps us be able to cope better. Our body can weather the physical ramifications of grief if we're taking good care of our body, right? If you get, practice good sleep hygiene, drink lots of water, get a little bit of daily exercise if you can, healthful eating, those all help to, strengthen your immunity system, right? And so I can see how Reiki would serve, by bringing your heart rate back down, which if it can do that, I'm willing to bet it probably brings your blood pressure back down, if even for the moment, right?
Exactly. And a good example is after, I believe, John died and I was at work, I found it very difficult to get through the day without, wanting to just fall apart. And one of the things I did is I would close the door to my office and I would just sit there very quietly, and I would just put my hand over my heart and over my stomach and just sort of, only think about the energy that was in my hand and in both of my hands. And it would sort of bring me back to a place of peace, so that I could open my door and go back out into the real world, so to speak, and try to tackle it, despite the fact that I felt like all I wanted to do was go home and crawl in bed and put the covers over my head. So it really does help. I mean, it's a modality that's about relaxation and stress reduction. And when you're grieving, I mean, that's kind of the last thing you think about, right, is relaxing and reducing your stress. You just keep pushing and pushing yourself. So just taking a few minutes a day and practicing, whatever tools are in your toolbox. And for me, it was Reiki. I found that I was able to really make it through those really difficult times. And to be honest with you, I looked back afterwards. I didn't think about it while I was going through it, but when I looked back after it was all over and I felt a little bit more like myself again, I realized I didn't get sick. And most of my clients I find who are grieving, especially right after somebody dies, they end up with bronchitis or pneumonia and I thought, oh, I didn't get sick. I mean, I really had the opportunity because of how tired and drawn out the grief was, but it didn't happen. And I thought, there's got to be something to this, practicing, self-care, as you said, and finding the tools, whether it's Reiki or anything else, to keep you, your energy centers balanced and to keep you healthy so that you can get through the emotions that are associated with your grief.
Well, I remember, when we lost our daughter, I learned that those nights that I get good quality sleep, I feel better the next day. I'm able to cope better.
Right.
And so to my mind, that is how Reiki can be useful. If you, again, practice Reiki on yourself or be a client and receive Reiki from someone, it will help you be able to cope better. And I think that, grief is not something that is cured.
No.
But I think that there's different modalities that we can use, like you said, a tool in a toolbox, that we can help strengthen our coping skills. And then we can weather the waves of grief a little better. But I want to ask you, you've been in Reiki a long time now, and you weathered the loss of your best friend, Joy. And then 2 years later, your former fiance, John, and now more recently, your father. Did you used Reiki during all three times on yourself? Did it require, because each grief is unique, right?
Right.
And so did it require different forms of Reiki with yourself? And then did you respond differently as well? Because your grief was different.
I think that's absolutely right. I think, there's basic practices that you can do with Reiki. And I try to be consistent with that because when you're grieving, you get that sort of brain fog. And if you have to think too much about what you're doing, then, you end up not doing it because our lack of concentration when we're grieving. Yeah. So I just made sure that I did something very simple, actually, for all three of them. And a lot of that was just placing my hand over my heart because your heart is the most impacted energy center or chakra when you're grieving, and your heart actually balances your lower energy centers and your upper energy centers. So when your heart isn't functioning properly, it can sort of turn your whole body out of whack. So the one thing that I did besides placing my hand, on my stomach and on my heart was to put both my hands on my heart and just concentrate on my hands and not think about anything else. And I found that was a very simple technique that I could use. I did find with my dad, and I think a lot of this had to do more with the grief work, was that because we had a good relationship, and I spent so much time with him I've been living with my parents for the last 5 years, and I spent so much time and we took trips, that the grief was there, but it wasn't as painful, if that makes sense. And I think because I was able to spend time with him, John was very painful, and I was receiving and doing self-Reiki because I needed that extra boost.
Yeah, right.
I felt so heartbroken.
Well, and the two losses were very different. John, you lost him by suicide. And so very different dynamics and parameters around that type of loss. And your dad, you had that anticipatory grief and, preparing yourself. And also, like you said, you had that opportunity. You had a loving relationship, and I think that it plays out into a very different emotions in the aftermath. So, but I can see how Reiki. What's that?
I think it does, because I think what happens is that when you're struggling and the grief is so painful, a lot of times it's because there's unfinished business, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
things that you woulda, shoulda, could have done. And we learn that with the grief recovery method is there's a, unresolved grief that, really can bring a lot of pain to our lives. And because I had taken the training, I had resolved those issues with my dad. And so while he was alive. And so, there were a few when he died that, you can't help, you're human. But I think having resolved those issues prior to his death certainly made the journey not quite as painful and not quite as intense from a Reiki perspective for me.
What a blessing to be
Yes.
able to have that time with your dad after having, two prominent losses in your life that were unexpected and tragic, and now having this one, the other end of the spectrum. What a blessing that is. So thank you for sharing that with us. So how can viewers contact you if they want to know more information about Reiki? You have your own business, Grief Reiki. And, how can they contact you to take classes or to receive Reiki from you, either as a client in person or remotely? How can they contact you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, and on Facebook at Grief Reiki, it's GRIEF and just REIKI. I do have a lot of my products and services on Facebook, but they can also go to my website, which is www.grief-reiki.com, and you can learn a little bit more about me and the services that we provide and some of the free webinars that we have and some of the in-person classes that we teach, as well as the sessions that we can do either online or in person.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you. You have a great website, so I really encourage our viewers to go there and check it out. So thanks so much, Sharon. I appreciate you joining us tonight. And, you've done a remarkable job of pairing, energy work with, grief and explaining it to us. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
You as well. You have a good night. We'll talk to you soon. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.